At dawn, a quiet village by the sea woke to the scrape of oars and the smell of salt. Among the boats, an aging fisherman everyone simply called Mr. John pushed off from the shore. He lived alone, no wife, no children, only the rhythm of tides to greet him and the hush of an empty room to see him home. That loneliness was a stone he kept in his pocket, small enough to carry, heavy enough to notice. On most days the sea was kind. He kept a portion of the catch for soup, sold the rest for rice and lamp oil, and spoke just enough with neighbors to remember he still had a voice. One afternoon, after selling fish in a neighboring village, Mr. John took a forest path home and found a man sitting roadside with a tiger cub at his feet. The man's face was thin, his hands trembling. "My family hasn't eaten in 2 days," he said softly. "Take the cub if you'll give me your fish." Mr. John hesitated. Every warning he'd ever heard about wild things lifted its head inside him. Yet compassion, the kind that rises like a tide before thought can anchor it, flooded his chest. He offered the fish. The man bowed in shaky gratitude, and Mr. John lifted the cub, surprised by its warmth and the fragile wheeze of its breath. When he returned, the villagers stared as if he'd carried a thundercloud into town. "A tiger is a tiger," one old woman said, not unkindly, "even when it purrs." Another neighbor shook his head. "You are trying to change the moon by wishing." Mr. John smiled with the weary optimism of someone who has patched many nets. He built a sturdy cage on the veranda, fed the cub fish, and spoke to it in the unhurried way you speak to the sea when you want it to remember your name. With each day, the cub followed his hands with its eyes, blinked sleepily in the afternoon light, and pressed its warm forehead against the bars when he came near. And in that small routine, cut fish, careful strokes, a soft whistle, Mr. John felt a new current moving under his life, something that sounded like companionship. People talk, as villages do. Some praised his kindness, others counted the risks like beads. A retired boatmaker, who had buried a wife and outlived 2 sons, stopped by often to watch. "When we grow old," the boatmaker murmured, "we look for gentle things to rest our eyes on. Be sure the thing you choose can also rest its hunger." Mr. John nodded. That night he lit a small oil lamp, set it near the cage, and sat with his tea. He remembered a line once heard from a traveling monk: "To care for a being is to honor both its nature and your limits." The words landed like oars against water, steadying, rhythmic. He promised himself he would be cautious. Weeks turned into seasons. The cub lengthened into sinew and shadow. Its paws thudded softly. Its breath soared the air with a new depth. Mr. John strengthened the cage and kept to his rituals: early nets, careful feeding, gentle voice. The tiger watched him with eyes that held a dusk-colored wisdom. On certain nights, when the wind carried the resin-sweet scent of the forest, the tiger paced tail like a metronome. Mr. John would place his palm against the wood, not touching, but close enough to feel the vibration of a body remembering what it was. He chose to believe that tenderness, repeated long enough, could sand down the sharper edges of the wild. Under that belief, something healed in him. The silence in his home thinned, the evenings were not as long, and he slept with the rare peace of a man whose heart had been given a task it could love. Yet beneath even the calmest sea, currents keep their own counsel, and in the hush before a coming storm, the old boatmaker's words would sometimes pulse back through his mind: "Be sure the thing you choose can also rest its hunger." One season folded into another, and the tiger grew taller than the doorway of Mr. John's home. Villagers whispered more loudly now, some from fear, some from awe. Children tugged their mothers' sleeves when the tiger padded by in its cage, eyes bright as dusk, chest rising with a steady rhythm. Mr. John tried to believe that kindness could outweigh instinct. He told himself that love, offered every day like rice into a bowl, could reshape a creature's nature. One morning, he set off toward the neighboring village, baskets of fish swaying from his shoulders. He locked the cage carefully, patted the tiger's flank through the bars, and promised to return before sunset. But fate has its own timing. Halfway home, clouds cracked open the mountain, a landslide swallowing the path. Trees bent like matchsticks, rocks the size of boats tumbled, and the road disappeared. Mr. John and other travelers were stranded. For 5 long days, he stayed in the neighboring village, counting time not by the sun but by the growl he imagined back home. When he finally returned, his steps hurried, breath thin, he found the tiger still alive but gaunt, its ribs like the slats of a basket. Its eyes burned with a hunger too deep for words. Mr. John's heart cracked with guilt and pity. He swung open the cage, whispering apologies, and reached out as he had always done with tenderness. But the tiger had crossed a line no affection could redraw. In an instant, instinct surged like floodwater. The beast lunged, and all his years of care could not soften its fangs. The village mourned him, yet some said the story had written itself from the start. A monk passing through heard of the tragedy, and spoke gently. "We can hold the ocean in our gaze, but never in our hands. To love something wild is to also love its freedom. Forget this, and suffering will come." His words spread, settling like evening mist over doorways and hearths. And so, the tale carried its lesson beyond grief. Some things cannot be fixed, no matter how much devotion we pour into them. Just as an old man cannot reverse the tide, or a tiger cannot forget the forest, so too must we learn to see clearly what can be guided and what must be released. Compassion is sacred, but wisdom is its compass. Together, they tell us when to reach out and when to step back. The seasons rolled on, but the story of Mr. John and his tiger did not fade. Villagers retold it to children by the fire, not as a tale of fear, but as a reminder of balance. Even love, they would say, must walk with caution, like a lantern carried through wind. For many, the tragedy softened their own judgments. Neighbors quarreled less fiercely, old men spoke more gently to their sons, and mothers reminded daughters that kindness is powerful, but not without boundary. The monk who had spoken at Mr. John's funeral remained in the village for a short while. Each evening, he sat beneath a banyan tree, offering words to those who gathered. "One night," he said, "a tiger may rest in your arms, but its dreams still run through the forest. To expect it to forget its wildness is like expecting the sea to stop its waves. Do not confuse love with control. True compassion allows both closeness and distance." His voice was calm, but it settled deeply into those listening. In time, the tiger's fate was sealed by the authorities who came to take it back to the forest. Some villagers followed the procession at a distance, watching as the animal disappeared between the trees. A strange quiet held the air, part relief, part sorrow. It was as though the village itself exhaled, reminded that every creature has a place it belongs. Years later, when new fishermen cast their nets at dawn, the story of Mr. John was still remembered. To the young, it was a caution about recklessness. To the elderly, it was a meditation on acceptance. And to those who had felt the ache of loneliness, it was a mirror. How longing can blind us, how tenderness can both heal and endanger. Perhaps this is why the story endures, because it asks of us a question we all must face. When we meet something or someone we long to hold, can we also find the strength to let them be as they are? Long after Mr. John's passing, the sea continued its endless song, and the village learned to weave his memory into their daily lives. The old boatmaker, who had once warned him, often sat by the shore, carving small wooden tigers for children. "Not to frighten you," he would explain softly, "but to remind you that beauty and danger sometimes share the same skin." The children, wide-eyed, would carry those carvings home, each piece a lesson carved from loss. The monk returned one final time, years later, his robe faded by countless journeys. The villagers gathered once more beneath the banyan tree. He looked at the faces before him, some older, some younger, all carrying their own quiet burdens, and said, "There are two truths we must keep close. The first, compassion is the flame that keeps our hearts from turning cold. The second, wisdom is the vessel that holds that flame, so it does not burn us." He paused, letting silence do the work words could not. He then told them a parable. A man once tried to carry water in his bare hands. His palms overflowed, his arms trembled, and soon he was left with nothing. Only when he found a bowl could he offer water to the thirsty. "So it is with love," the monk said. "Without wisdom, it slips away or destroys. With wisdom, it nourishes." That night, lanterns glowed along the village path, their light soft against the sea breeze. Some said they saw in that glow the gentleness Mr. John had given, and in the shadows beyond, the tiger's restless spirit returning to the wild. The story no longer ended in tragedy, but in teaching. And so the villagers carried it forward, not as a warning alone, but as a compass, to give with kindness, to act with care, and to remember that not everything can or should be changed. In this way, Mr. John's life became larger than his loneliness, larger even than his mistake. It became a mirror for every soul who hears it, asking quietly, *, where must you love, and where must you let go? *.